And good evening, our fellow listeners and followers. Today is July 23rd, Sunday at 8:16 p.m. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio.
And Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode is Principles Over Party, how our past went from party principles to constitutional principles. And we will also discuss another issue concerning due process violations, kind of an add-on to what we discussed last week. Just the overall topic of tonight is just kind of an open-ended discussion about, how we got to where we're at today with concerns to politics. And, if you've been listening to our program for a while, you know that we both kind of view elections as kind of a circus. It's really a sideshow, and really we need to get back to people wanting principles and liberty, wanting to be responsible for their own lives. And I think the political system, especially with the way it's set up with the two-party system, just creates these divisions that make it very hard to get people to think about the issues that really matter and how they can better their own lives without politicians making false promises.
Yeah, that is right. I would like to ask you, and then you can ask me, how did you get started in politics, Seth? And what was your beginning political lineage?
Yeah, honestly, I guess I grew up, my family, my parents voted, but I think back I was born in 83, so, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. It was a healthier time, in my opinion, where my parents voted. We didn't have 24-hour news channels. We didn't have all that crap that I think has really made things worse. But, they watched the presidential debates and stuff like that and stuff. And, I grew up in a church-going family. We're Christians, and, so there's some issues that, obviously abortion's been an issue for me most of my life, and gun rights have also been an issue for me because I come from a hunting family. So, I had the groundwork of being on the right, but really when I didn't really get involved in politics until I was old enough to vote, because of our two-party system, growing up being for gun rights, being pro-life, I just assumed, I'm a Republican, and, the Republicans are great, the Democrats are bad. I got started voting, and I was in college Republicans at Western Illinois University. I was Mr. Conservative in the college Republicans because I was conservative across the board. But ultimately, when I look back on that time, I haven't really changed my principles too much. I have the same principles I've always had and the same fundamental beliefs. I just started thinking for myself. And that's what the two-party system doesn't want people to do. They don't want people thinking for themselves. And that's why, in 2012, I was a Ron Paul supporter, and I remember George W. Bush, my first president that I voted for, and I was a huge fan of. The first time I really started questioning that was in 2008 when Bush said, to save the free market system, we have to abandon it. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's nonsense. What are you talking about? That's the first time I really started questioning George W. Bush, and that changed a whole lot, and that started me down the path of thinking for myself and realizing how corrupt both parties are. And obviously in between that time, you and I worked together with the National Right to Work Committee, and that's kind of how I got started in politics.
Mm-hmm. No, that is. I mean, my family had been generally conservative, mostly Republican. I kind of saw a wake-up call when I get my first paycheck for my first job, and I asked my dad, "Hey, what's this amount and what's this amount?" And he goes, "Well, this is your pre-tax amount. That's how much money you earned, but this is how much you're gonna get with taxes taken out." And I go, "Taxes? So the government takes away my money?" And that's what really kind of said, well, why are they taking my hard-earned money that I've worked for into Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and whatnot? And I started questioning that. And my first campaign that I worked with was for Governor Jeb Bush for governor, his re-election campaign. I really enjoyed it. Jeb Bush, as a governor for the southern state of Florida, he actually did not partake in being with his brother in the White House and him as governor. He really maintained not a lot of dependency on the federal government. That's one thing that I really take courage of Jeb Bush, that he didn't show a lot of dependency as we see now. And later on, I got a job with the National Right to Work Committee. That's where I met you, Seth, and we worked well. And I started working in 2004, and I wasn't too partial with George W. Bush. Even in his first campaign, I wasn't too enthusiastically. I mean, my family both are very Republican, and so I had to go along with it, but I wasn't too keen. Then in 2004, where I realized that George W. Bush endorsed Arlen Specter and not Pat Toomey, I'm like, wait a minute, Arlen Specter is the most rhino-ish liberal that I bet he probably would endorse Donald Trump for president, because he's I know may he rest in peace, but he would have definitely endorsed Donald Trump for president. So I said, how come the GOP did that over Pat Toomey, who's a little bit more conservative? And that's where I started, questioning that. And then living in Montana and working with the GOP, and also the same thing when I was in Colorado. When you were in Colorado, President Bush endorsed Congressman Bob Bupre over the conservative candidate. I forgot his name, and a few other ones. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. And George W. Bush endorsed Conrad Burns and not Bob Keenan. And of course, the establishment, Danny Rehberg, also endorsed Conrad Burns, which Conrad Burns' campaign slogan, which I do quote from time to time, was delivering from Montana. I mean, and all this, type of thing is delivering from my state and, all that. And it's, bringing home the bacon from other states to your state, taking away the fruits and labor of the state of Florida, the state of Virginia, into the state of Montana. And that's where I said something's not right here. And this two-party system, again, they do it from both sides. And that's where I saw I've seen the light, and now I am a staunch independent. I don't go with, I don't go with either party. And I've always said that if I were a Democrat, I'd be a Grover Cleveland fan. If I were a Republican, I were a Calvin Coolidge fan, because those are the ones that believed in limited federal government and more individualism, more sovereignty to the states. And in today's world, you rarely see that, and I'm trying to really wake up the people to see that.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing is waking up to seeing how both parties are corrupt. Because that's what we see is, we see how both sides actually make the same arguments just at different times. Like, back just within the last few years, you had the George Floyd stuff, and suddenly it was the Democrats wanted to defund the police. Now, fast forward, we look at the FBI, and the FBI conservatives are kind of waking up, but they're waking up because they see their guy Donald Trump. They feel like he's been had his rights violated, which, as far as I can tell, I think they've had warrants for everything that they've done to him. I mean, I do think there's politics behind the way they're going after Donald Trump, but I'm not going to shed a tear for Trump on this one. But now the conservatives are the ones calling to defund the police. In this case, the FBI, the federal police. But it's just kind of funny how you can see how both sides will make the same exact argument just at different times. When the Democrats are in charge, the Republicans suddenly are against the bureaucracies. But when the Republicans are in charge, the Democrats are against the bureaucracies. And it's just, it's so obvious and absurd. And nobody is able to talk about, like, principally, what is the role of government? We don't even talk about that anymore. Everybody just assumes the government's there to take care of us. And that's the sick nature of the two-party system. And so it's just it's hard to convince people on anything dealing with principles and foundational issues. It's just Democrats bad, Republicans good, or Republicans bad, Democrats good. And people need to break free of that. And, for me, I started kind of, when we were with National Right to Work Committee, that 2006 election cycle, that was the first time I voted third party for governor in Illinois, because I had actually learned something from somebody with National Right to Work about backroom deals to get Judy Bar DePinka the gubernatorial nomination that year, and I was supporting Jim Oberweis for governor in Illinois before joining National Right to Work. And I started learning about these backroom deals, and I'm like, oh, the Illinois Republican Party is corrupt. And that's the first time I started seeing the corruption within the party that I was involved with. Fast forward to 2012, and I'm supporting Ron Paul that year, and I start seeing the corruption in the national GOP, and I'm seeing how they already had Mitt Romney was basically coronated as the nominee that year, and I saw how corrupt the process was, and I'm like, this whole party is corrupt, and it kind of rubs you the wrong way, and you start opening your eyes a bit, and you see that this two-party system is the real problem. And to go back to George Washington, our nation's first president, his warning in his farewell address was to beware of, one of many great warnings by George Washington was to beware of the spirit of party. And, George Washington recognized it's kind of in human nature to kind of join together with like-minded people. But he said, look, that you have to beware of the spirit of party and not allow that to take over. And unfortunately, we have allowed that to take over. And it didn't take long. I mean, right after George Washington, we started seeing parties forming. That's the sad reality. But, I think that was a great warning by our country's first president. And something that we should think a lot more about.
Yeah, and then after George Washington came John Adams, which I rarely sympathize with the second president of a republic, because he's the one that really also increased the federal government, not only with the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798, but with the appointment of did he appoint John Marshall? I think he did appoint John Marshall to the Supreme Court, and also with doing stuff that really did go against the Constitution, and inciting the infamous judicial review that has even made it even worse. I'm not saying that courts don't have the right to judicial review. They just don't have the right to make judicial lawmaking. And, that's where the birthplace of the political parties come. But my issue, Seth, with the birthplace of political parties is the hypocrisy that they both create. Because I'm going to read you this quote, and I want to see if you can tell me if it was said by a Republican or Democrat. In the first place, the Bible is and I know that you're a religious man. I know you're a man of God. I know, but let's see if you can tell me if it was said by a Republican or Democrat. In the first place, the Bible is the foundation upon which our American government is built. The evolutionist who denies the biblical story of creation as well as other biblical accounts cannot be a Christian. It goes hand in hand with modernism, makes Jesus Christ a fakir, robs the Christian of his hope, and undermines the foundation of our government.
I'm going to guess a Democrat.
Yes. And I thought when I first read that, I go, this sounds like a Republican nowadays. And this was the Democrats nowadays. This was John Washington Butler who sponsored the legislation in Tennessee to deny the theory of evolution and to praise the theory of creation. Now, I'm not a Darwinist guy, and I'm not a biblical man that believes on the idea of creationism. I am the kind of person that says, why can't you teach both and let the children decide? Let the kids say, did we come from monkeys or did we come from two human beings that, later on had intercourse with incest, which, again, in many southern states, they don't see a problem with that. That's why I don't think they see a problem with that, because they do practice incest. But, this is the problem that, in those days, it was Democrats who were the pro-Christian, and they believed that, Christianity is the foundation upon this American government. And now it's the Republicans. The same thing with civil rights. It was the Democrats who opposed it, and the Republicans were for it, with a few minor exceptions on the Democrat side. But now it's the other way around. The Republicans are, denying the civil rights to many black Americans and other minority citizens. And the Democrats are the ones who praise that. So my issue is the hypocrisy of political parties, that they switch sides, that they think it's totally normal, and confuse people. And they think, the GOP is the grand old party. Not necessarily. That's something I never understood. The Republican Party is called the grand old party, but in the end, they came after the Democratic Party. So shouldn't the DNC be the GOP? So, no. So my, and then, one thing I want to also leave where I see the hypocrisy of a two-party system is after 1992, where Ross Perot took away votes from George Herbert Walker Bush. And so both parties united to crush any third-party candidates to ever set foot in the national stage. That is, they trash each other, they bicker with each other. Trump bickers with Democrats bicker with Republicans, and so on. And yet they join forces to oust third-party candidates. And the people don't realize that. That's despicable and hypocritical.
Yeah, it's something you actually see very clearly with this election cycle we're in now. I mean, there's been statements made that Joe Biden doesn't plan to debate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or any of the other Democrats who are running in the primary, and basically, a lot of Republicans have seized onto that. Like he has an obligation to debate these people. He has he has to debate them. But then Donald Trump has basically said he has no plans to debate his Republican rivals. And crickets. Nobody says anything about that. just kind of, it's kind of funny to actually see the clear hypocrisy in front of you, and that people can't even see how they're being hypocritical. You can point it out to them, and they won't even notice it. But yeah, I mean, and again, it gets back to the idea that these presidents, why does it matter so much, the presidential debate? I mean, and just who the president is. I mean, the reason people invest so much time and energy in the presidential election is because they really think the president is the most powerful man in the world. They say that as if it's a good thing. Well, the presidents aren't supposed to have much power. I mean, if you view the president as such a powerful position, then yeah, you want to make sure your guy's in and not the other guy, because the other guy's going to use power against you, or your guy is going to use power for you. But I want a government where the politicians don't really have power, where it's very little power, where they're actually public servants. And they're there to protect our rights. And nobody seems to want that. Everybody wants the politicians to have power as long as it's their guys in power. And this is something that we have to get rid of. This idea that this is not what the nation was founded on. The nation was founded on, self-government, on American citizens controlling their own destiny without government interference. And the two-party system is destroying our ability to have that discussion on what the role of government actually should be. I just want to touch on too, because you had brought up not being a big fan of George W. Bush from the beginning, and I think about that too. I mean, I wasn't old enough to vote until 2004, so I didn't get to vote in the 2000 election. But I remember the 2000 election, conservatives were not very big fans of George W. Bush. I think Pat Buchanan might have been running in 2000. I think he was one of the big conservative guys. I think, following it, even not as a voter, but, somebody who was going to be voting soon. I remember I was not a huge fan of George W. Bush, but once he got the nomination, everybody just falls in line. Oh, this guy is so great. He was always the best candidate. I saw it with Mitt Romney too, where all these people were like, we cannot have Mitt Romney. We cannot have Mitt Romney. He's the candidate. Oh, Mitt Romney was the best candidate all along, and we knew it all the time. We were just, holding him accountable to make sure that he was ready for running against Barack Obama. And you just kind of see how the party chooses the candidate, and the people don't really have a voice in the primary process. And that same goes for Donald Trump too. I remember a lot of conservatives, and I'm not a fan of Ted Cruz, but most of my conservative friends were Ted Cruz supporters, and they didn't like Donald Trump. But once Donald Trump became the nominee, boy, did they get on board with Donald Trump. And it's and Donald Trump, who basically, even if he said something I would agree with, the next statement he would undermine everything I agreed with in the previous statement. So Donald Trump was never a conservative, and yet conservatives praise this guy like he was such a great president, and he never was a good president from the very beginning. And you just see how the parties manipulate people into a cult. Both parties are a cult, and people need to wake up to that.
Yeah, a couple points to that, Seth. I was, in the 2000 election, that's where you actually saw a lot of more, even though they weren't on the national scene because they didn't get the much numbers. Only Ross Perot was the last one, but you had Ralph Nader on the left challenging Al Gore, and you had Pat Buchanan on the right challenging George W. Bush. And many people were not keen with George W. Bush either. And the same thing with Al Gore. Many people didn't really like Al Gore. It's just when it came down to Florida, then they were starting to say, well, my vote should count, blah, 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 and, and all that. And I just had a debate with somebody at a local bar here where he was saying that Jeb Bush stole the election of 2000. I go, no. Nobody stole the election of nobody. The electoral votes was given to George W. Bush. The state electors said that those votes belonged to George W. Bush, and so be it. That's how we elect the president. We're not into this fanatism of populism, of the popular vote. I really can't. I don't know who was the idiotic framer of the Constitution or the founders that insisted in having a popular vote. I don't know if it was John Adams. I don't know if it was James Wilson. I don't know who it was. But, this idea of a popular vote, it's what crumbling this republic because you're getting uncertainties, you're getting corruption, and you're getting unwanted patronage and unwanted money and funds into this, and and then came 2020 where Trump says that this election is rigged. It never was rigged. It's always been how it's always been. The electoral vote, the electoral college votes for the president. The popular vote, you get to vote for your congressman, you get to vote for your senator, which I disagree, but you get to vote for your senator, and you get to vote for your president. But your vote doesn't really count for president because the electoral college will decide. And we should not have a popular vote because that's what really kills it. That's why it kills it with the National Senate. The most heated National Senate that I've read was the 1946 Texas primary between Lyndon Johnson and Coke Stevenson, and it was really heated. It was everybody was on national news. LBJ got on national television, and I'm like saying, wait a minute, this is an election in Texas. Why is New York media so confounded with an election in Texas? Why are other senators endorsing this person? And the same thing goes in present day times. Why do I see Ted Cruz endorse Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz endorse whoever? Or even Bernie Sanders endorsing Gavin Newsom or any other Democrat? They should stick to their own areas and just don't interfere in that state's election. That's why that's one thing that I can't stand with this two-party system, that there's a lot of interference that there shouldn't be. You never saw Thaddeus Stevens endorsing James Buchanan just because they were Pennsylvanian. I mean, even though there were different parties, but you never saw them endorsing each other. They remained separated. They knew what separation of powers meant back then. But nowadays, everybody endorses everybody, and everybody is on YouTube and social media and saying, I endorse blah, 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 bleep, bleep, blue, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And that's one thing that also I find despicable. But another thing I want to bring up that you also brought up, and I lost my train of thought a couple of seconds ago. No, I think let me come back to it because I know I want to touch on that, but it's just there's a sense of corruption there. There's a sense of patronage that it's unwanted, it's unneeded, and it shouldn't exist.
Yeah, and I think on just on that point on how somebody from Illinois, you're in Florida, I'm in Illinois. I could endorse somebody for Florida governor. Well, why would I do that? I'm in Illinois. And why would you endorse somebody from Illinois for governor here? But that gets to the point that it's just an example of how we have become this central control in Washington that we need to make sure that the right people are elected in every state now. And well, if we got the government cut down to size, people would be able to actually focus on, we both kind of said that we have no intentions of voting for president this coming election. And I don't really have any intentions to vote for anybody for federal office because there really is no point to it. I mean, it's so corrupt in D.C. But the state and local elections are the only elections where I see there being any reason to vote. Even then, you can't be putting hope in these politicians. You hope you put a little hope that the politicians you elect at the state and local level might stand in the way to make sure that the federal abuse stops. But for the most part, we the people need to start standing up on our own and saying and resisting unlawful government, and that's really the heart of it. Is that the people need to wake up to their responsibility of preserving their own liberty and stop looking towards any politician to preserve their liberty. But we even got this. Like I said, we've got a central authority in Washington, D.C. now that nobody seems to care about. They don't care that we've lost our states' rights. We've lost our individual rights. But it's even worse than that we really have, it's not official, but we basically have a one world government today. I mean, we have a globalist government where we have NATO, we have the UN, we have these things, and we have foreigners coming to America to tell American politicians how to spend our money, how to spend taxpayer dollars, and that just sickens me. I wrote about Boris Johnson going to Texas to convince Texas Republicans to keep supporting Ukraine, and I'm not a fan of what's going on with all the money going over to Ukraine. I am completely against it, but it's not even that issue. It's that this bozo Boris Johnson thinks he has the ability to come to the United States and tell politicians to steal more of our money to send over to a corrupt oligarch in Ukraine. I mean, that is offensive. That should offend people, that foreigners are coming here to endorse political parties. That should offend people, but it doesn't. And, we really need to get back to liberty and personal responsibility and wanting to do things on our own. And that's what the two-party system stands in the way of. It stands in the way of people thinking for themselves.
Yeah, and you mentioned an international figure like Boris Johnson coming into, and you mentioned Texas, which I'm going to give a little example here, but the world doesn't like when the United States meddles into other nations. We don't like it when other nations meddles in our affairs. For example, the annoying person Milo Yiannopoulos that started meddling in the U.S. affairs and being all MAGA and all that. Or the same thing with Prince Harry saying stupid things about the First Amendment and blah blah blah. You're here as a guest or you're here as a permanent resident, and I know you're married to a U.S. citizen, but just because you're married to a U.S. citizen doesn't make you a U.S. citizen yet. Once you obtain that citizenship status, then you can criticize the government all you want. Until then, you're still a UK citizen. But I've been reading a debate between Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun where they were touching the base where when Texas was submitted to the Union, there were conversations between when John C. Calhoun was Secretary of State, I believe, that England was demanding and petitioning that Texas abolish their slavery clause in the Constitution and become a free state. And, Britain just showed their complaints about it, which again, that's, I mean, they can petition to the U.S. government, but they can say, Texas entering the Union, that's fine. But the goal is that John C. Calhoun said that, if Britain continues with this threat, that the federal government should come to the aid of Texas and the assistance of Texas to preserve the Constitution. And that's where, that's where I disagree with Calhoun. You cannot give the federal government aid and assistance to a sovereign state just to protect their interests. That's not how it's supposed to be. What happens if Pennsylvania created an abolitionist law and the Empire of Brazil gets upset? And, Thaddeus Stevens says, well, the federal government should come to the aid of Pennsylvania. No. I mean, Pennsylvania has a legislature. They create the laws of their own choosing. The same thing with Texas, even though I disagree with slavery 100%. But until then, let them see the wisdom that they're going to have issues with that. And they did. Now there was a war between, but England started putting sanctions and tariffs on sanctions on the United States because of the slavery issue. So they suffered a lot. So this is the kind of thing that the ignorance of the few within our Congress, that we've seen it back then in 1850 to present day 1950 and present day, that this dependency that both parties have created, this dependency that we need to be supported by the federal government. I've been reading on Daniel Webster and John C. Calhoun, and they both crave this dependency of federal government aid and assistance. We've seen it with FDR, with Lyndon Johnson, with George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden. So this has always been a big debate that people are not aware of, unlike you and I, Seth, where, this thing of dependency, we need to stop being so dependable. And one last thing, now I remember this discussion I had with this person at the local bar here in Coral Gables, that he says, well, how come California and New York are supporting these red states? And I said to him, well, the reason why those blue states are supporting the red states is because the red state congressional delegation is always asking for pork money, for money back to their home state. And yes, California is a very rich state. New York is a very rich state. Illinois is a very rich state. But, you don't have to be like that. The Marco Rubios, the Ted Cruz, the Richard Burr, Saxby Chambliss. No, it's not Saxby Chambliss. It's the other senator from Georgia. They don't have to be dependable of the federal government and getting all this money from California and New York. But again, it's because of the 16th and 17th Amendment that has created this corruption, and I shut him down. He actually was like, oh, yeah, you're right. It is the red state congressional delegation that are doing this. Of course. So yeah, I mean, and it's vice versa. Florida is also supporting California on many issues that they have with their trains, fast bullet trains, their production of strawberries and whatever and whatnot, and tourism in California. So it goes vice versa. So, it's this dependency that Daniel Webster and John Calhoun and in present tense have created this idea that we need to be dependable of the federal government, and that is not so.
Yeah, and that's something that I've seen as a reporter covering local government, and I've made this case many times that we don't have any local government anymore. They're all reliant on getting their hands on federal grant money, and it always offends me, but I know it offends nobody else, which is the problem that I see. Like one of the villages I cover just approved a new park. They're gonna do some construction to basically renovate a child's park. It's a children's playground, and it's going to be paid for through federal grants. And I'm sitting here thinking, why are taxpayers in Iowa, Florida, Texas, anywhere else paying for a child's playground in a village in Illinois? And it offends me. and I know it offends nobody else. Everybody's happy. Oh, you got federal grants to pay for this park. Isn't that great? And I'm sitting there like, no, this is not great. This just shows how corrupt our system is. It shows how backwards our system is, and that's the way. The way things operate is we send all this money to Washington, and then Washington divvies out a portion of that back to the states, and generally it's to the friendly states, to the party that's perceived in power, while Washington keeps a little bit of that money. But it creates this really corrupt system, and it also creates higher prices. I mean, if we actually had independence and we actually had states reliant on themselves and local government reliant on themselves to take care of the limited scope of authority that they have, it would be so much cheaper. And people don't realize that this system is creating the higher prices. It's creating monopolies, it's creating corruption, and people need to wake up to that.
No, you're right, and I'm glad you made that point. One point I'm going to make, and then we can discuss the other issue. But you make a good point. When money comes into Washington, they just spend it whenever, and that's something that people also are very ignorant in countries like in Scandinavian countries, or even Canada, our neighbor to the north. When they receive their taxation, I asked this to a Canadian who I was talking to because he was owner of a print shop, and I asked him about their system of government, and he says, yeah, Canada, you do have a healthcare system that is very socialist, but I pay into the system, and it's a very good system. And I said, well, let me ask you, how can it be such a good system? Well, I mean, as far as medicine, U.S. is better. But as far as efficiency and accountability and appropriation, Canada is better. Because when they receive that money, they appropriate it correctly to that area of needed funding on healthcare, on education, on whatever. Here in the United States, they receive money, and then they're giving money to a study of fish guppies in the wildlands of Missouri. Who in their right mind gives a crap about fish guppies, for God's sakes? So, that's the problem that we have in this country, is that when they appropriate those funds, they appropriate it so badly and so incorrectly that people don't realize that. Yes, in Scandinavian countries, their system of government may be a little bit socialist, but those socialists, they know how to appropriate those funds correctly into where it needs to go. The same thing with the Canadians. So, that's the problem also that we have in Washington, D.C., is that when they receive the money, they put it for a study for manatee preservation down here in Florida, or wildlife preservation in Montana, or Yosemite Park or park preservation in California. I mean, come on, give me a break. That should be funded at the state level. All that should be funded at state level. California has its own state legislature. They can fund for park preservation, bear preservation, wolf preservation at their own level. They don't need my tax dollars, as well as they don't need their tax dollars coming to Florida to preserve manatees. So that's one problem that we have, that people forget about that. They just want to receive the money. They just want to receive the pork. And that really really infuriates me that people don't see that, and they always come up, the Trumpers and other people. Well, Sweden and Norway, they're socialists, they're communists. Yeah, but they're socialists and communists with a better appropriation agenda than the United States Congress. I'll tell you that. I'd rather be a member of the Norwegian Parliament than the U.S. Congress, because again, that's where, they appropriate the funds correctly. And this is something that, the United States, as disciplined that America is, and very well in line. But when it comes to appropriating funds, they're just like a Latin American country or a European Latin country. Very disorganized.
Yeah, and that it goes into, I think that's partly the problem is that people don't actually recognize what kind of system we have today. They have the rose-colored glasses. They think that America is this free market system, and it was at one time, but it's not anymore, and it hasn't been for a long time. I mean, we talk about healthcare, and everybody was so like Obamacare. It's going to make us a socialist healthcare system. I'm like, hey, look, we've had socialism in the healthcare system for a long time. Obamacare was just the new latest greatest socialist scheme to expand the fraudulent system. I think that ultimately, it's. But like you said, I'm not a fan of the socialist systems of these other countries that you brought up, but they do. I mean, they have it, and they actually treat it the way it's supposed to be treated if you're going to have it. Here in America, we have new socialist scheme after new socialist scheme that basically and yet people think we have a free market system. We need to get back to actual free markets, and people, healthcare, in my opinion, is not the responsibility of the government. It's the responsibility of individuals to provide for their own healthcare needs. And if we actually had that system, we wouldn't have the problems with health insurance. I think we're overinsured in this country. I think you don't really need health insurance to pay for your regular doctor visits. It's really for the big, if you have a heart attack, you're probably going to need health insurance to pay for that big cost. But we'd actually see prices go down if we actually had a true free market system. Mm-hmm. But people are just so dependent on it. And so, it's like another thing is like Social Security. This is kind of another thing that's led me to just see how ridiculous a two-party system is that I've always been like, why do we have a Social Security system? Why do we have the government planning for our retirement? I mean, this is nonsense. And, the best thing you can get ever from Republicans is they want to reform it. And no, get rid of it. I mean, there's all these things that the government does that I disagree with. And the Republicans sell you reform. Well, a lot of this stuff doesn't need to be reformed. It needs to be eliminated. And you can't say that. You're attacking an entitlement, and people are entitled to this. Well, no, they're not. I have this strange view that we're actually entitled to nothing in this life except what we work for. And even then, because we live in an unfair world, we're not always going to get what we've earned. But today, everybody seems to be entitled to have everything taken care of for them. And that it just, people need to want independence, and that's the thing that I think we try to touch on every week, is that people need to think for themselves and desire to take care of themselves.
Yeah, one final point I like to make, Seth, is you mentioned they look at it in rose-colored glasses. I say they look at it into MAGA-colored glasses nowadays, because Trump kept saying, "Oh, America's not a socialist country," and in CPAC had a thing on that. America's not a socialist country, and I'm like saying to myself, "Wait a minute, I don't know if we're the only country, but we have in the Constitution where Congress has a right to take away our income, our money, our livelihood." And, people don't realize that. And you mentioned Social Security. Yeah, I don't want to reform it. I want to repeal it. I want to repeal that amendment that is causing all the troubles in the world. But these Trumpers, these liberals on the Democratic side, these Republicans on the MAGA side, they are so out of touch, out of whack, that they don't care, and they just think, "Oh, we can reform it." No, you can't put a Band-Aid on on an already cut wound, you have to, do something serious to get rid of that bleeding, to stop that bleeding. And a Band-Aid's not going to help it, or Band-Aids are not going to help it. And, this is a very ongoing battle that you and I have been talking about, that they just don't want to see it, and they just want to cover it up because, either the damage is already done, but if the damage is already done, there's a way to get rid of the damage. But, it's just very frustrating at times that, you have both Republicans and Democrats that they don't want to see it because you don't want to spoil their funding. And it's just, very, very frustrating at times. But the other issue that we're going to talk about is, and I know Seth was working on a few articles on his own, was the system of due process in certain cases. There's one that Seth was going to bring up on civil asset forfeiture, and I was going to bring something that a federal judge just declared Arizona law unconstitutional, where that law forbid a citizen to videotape a police officer, and the federal judge struck it down. So I'll let you take it on yours first, Seth.
Yeah, on civil asset forfeiture, this is just a kind of an insane practice that we allow in this country. Basically, it's theft by the government, and I've written on this in the past. But last year I wrote for the Liberty Loft on a case, but this was from the Institute for Justice. They're basically how they describe civil asset forfeiture. They say civil forfeiture flips innocent until proven guilty on its head and forces property owners to hire an attorney and prove their innocence in court to get their property back. Worse still, the federal government pays state officers to abuse civil forfeiture through a program called equitable sharing, in which state officers can seize money, hand it over to the federal government to do all the work forfeiting it, and then get most of the forfeited money returned as a kickback. And so why this issue is important now is that the Rutherford Institute is among several legal outfits that have brought a case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to hear a case called Cully v. Marshall. And in this case, it was 2019. A Alabama police department seized a vehicle belonging to somebody named Halima Cully. And the car was used by other individuals who were accused of drug possession. Cully, him or herself, I'm not sure, Halima, if that's a male or female's name, but Cully was innocent of any wrongdoing, was not accused of any crimes, but the state seized Cully's vehicle and filed it under civil asset forfeiture and took ownership over the vehicle. And Cully had to prove the innocence before getting the car back. But it took 20 months for Cully to get the car returned. Ultimately, Cully won the case, but now they're filing a case that the Supreme Court's going to hear, claiming that their rights were violated, their due process rights under the 14th Amendment, because they were not provided with a prompt hearing for the opportunity to get back possession of their vehicle. And, this is the case I wrote about last year with the Liberty Loft involved actually a Afghanistan and Iraq war veteran, decorated Marine, Stephen Lara. He was pulled over in Nevada, and he was pulled over for an educational campaign that the police were pulling people over to tell them the rules of the road, which, I mean, that in and of itself, I don't know how that's lawful, but that's beyond the point. He had he had nearly $90,000 in cash on him because he doesn't trust banks, and I understand that. So he had all of his life savings. He was going from Texas to California, and basically he allowed the police to search his vehicle, even though they had no reason to. It was an education campaign. The police asked him if they could search his vehicle, and they found the cash, and they admitted to him, well, cash is not illegal, but it's odd to have this much cash on you. And so they brought in a drug sniffing dog that hit on it because I don't know if people realize this, but almost all of currency in circulation has traces of drugs on them. And so that gave them the cause under their warped system to think, oh yeah, we can steal your money. And he had to fight over a year to get his life savings back. And he had committed no crimes. It just was odd that he carried a lot of cash on him. This is what civil asset forfeiture does. It allows police to steal your property, your cash, because they suspect it of being used in the commission of a crime, even though they don't suspect the owner of committing a crime, because if they went after the owner, they'd actually have to go through due process and find them guilty before they could do anything against them. In civil asset forfeiture, it says, hey, we can steal your property, and now you have to prove your innocence to get your property back. And it's just one of the many messed up programs in our police state.
Yeah, and this is very similar to this type of civil asset forfeiture that the government, federal government, or with coordination with state and local authorities can come in and say, oh, you have this amount of cash, we need to apprehend it. It's the same thing as a law passed by Nixon that you can't, you have to declare this amount of money, anything above $10,000 that you're carrying, you have to declare it. But anything below that, and that was very beneficial to the narcos at that time, the drug dealers. They were sending back money, $9,999, and nobody said anything because it was under the law that, So the government loves to contradict themselves. Justices love to contradict themselves, and it creates a lot of confusion, creates a lot of unnecessary loopholes that creates black market deals. And again, it's all at the bequest and the beholding of the federal government that, they think that they have the authority. They don't have the authority. People, the Bill of Rights is part of the Constitution. It is a compact that states have abide to it when they enter this union. And for example, Texas started making Texas is under fire right now because they're crossing into private property while they were building their type of border. Well, you cannot enter into someone else's property, a private property or federal lands, to create a border. If that person is facing an issue with Mexico, then that's on his property and he has to deal with it accordingly. But Texas has no right to come in and says, we're going to take this land just for the hell of it. There is a sense of due process, and, you cannot just take away. And I think that farmer has a case that's a violation of his Ninth Amendment and Fourth Amendment right. And, it's where government has become arrogant. The federal government has become arrogant in their in her thirst for more power. And I would like to see where Justice Thomas, will render his opinion on it. I'm not too hopeful that he'll be for the Fourth Amendment and for individual rights, but we will see where he. If I'm a betting man, I'll say he probably will side with law enforcement because that's where his stance being most of the time, and the same thing with the other. Maybe Gorsuch will sign to the other side, to the individual rights. I don't think Kavanaugh will do it. Definitely not Roberts. So it'll be interesting to see because it's a violation of our individual rights and with accordance to the Bill of Rights of the Constitution that we are in a compact with. So, but we'll keep a close eye on it and we'll debate. We'll discuss it more in the upcoming episodes. Any last thoughts on our discussion, Seth?
I'll just point out people be surprised how much they would actually side with the the quote unquote left wing justices when it comes to like Fourth Amendment issues. They tend to be better than the Republican appointed judges. I actually think it'd be an interesting thing. There's so many Supreme Court cases and decisions and opinions that come out that nobody ever discusses. But if you actually read some of these opinions by the justices, you'd be surprised how often you actually agree with the judges you think that you always disagree with, and how often you actually disagree with the judges that you think you'll always agree with. And I think when it comes to like Fourth Amendment, police issues in general, the Republican appointed judges are generally very bad.
Yeah, exactly. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may she rest in peace, but she did tend to favor more Fourth Amendment right than law enforcement rights. Even though that in her according to Katie Couric, in one of her final interviews, she sided with. She did not side with the kneelers and with and applying First Amendment status. And I always thought that was a very if Justice Ginsburg did say that, that's very MAGA of her to say. So, but you're right there. The liberal side of the court has always tended to be more faithful to the Fourth Amendment than the Republican side or the conservative side of the court. Yeah. So, but any last thoughts of our discussion, Seth? That we had a great discussion about our past and what we hold for our country in the future.
Just what we've discussed tonight. Think for yourself and don't let politicians promise you stuff. You need to start holding your politicians accountable and stop, bowing down and worshiping them.
That's true, and I would say stop, being so partisan in your political party and say, "Oh, I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to vote Democrat just for the hell of it." Or I'm a Republican, so I'm going to vote Republican just for the hell of it. No, I mean, think carefully for who you're aligning yourself with. You're aligning with a political party system that will bicker and fight with one another, but then when it comes time to push and shove, they'll join forces and they'll stab you in the back. So be mindful of the two-party political system that is not helping this country, and think for yourself. Don't think of party politics or party leadership. Think for yourself as an individual and see what is right and how to go for it.
Yeah.
So. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this discussion, our fellow listeners and viewers and followers, and we'll be back for more this coming Sunday, and you also have a great night.
Good night.